Welcome to our Auburn Postgame show here on our Auburn Tigers at AL.com Facebook page. I am Matt Scalisi, joined here by Wesley Siner, who's a longtime Auburn beat writer, now one of our video producers here at AL.com. Wes, not a good outcome tonight for the Auburn Tigers, and I think we'll break down where we think it went wrong for Auburn, where we think they can go from here. But just to start it off, I want to talk about just kind of like the positioning of this game in the season, because I do think it's probably the unique thing that sticks out about this game and this installment of this rivalry. To play Georgia essentially week 2 of the season is unheard of. To play Georgia this early, I mean, really any earlier than the final month of the season, is something that most Auburn fans probably can't remember the last time that happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like I don't even know. I mean, none of us were alive when Auburn and Georgia were not meeting in the month of November. So, and that was going to be the case, in the original 2020 schedule. They had already moved Georgia up the schedule. I know things got shuffled around once they, released the updated SEC only schedule, but it still had Auburn, Georgia really early on. And, to be honest, I thought this year it might benefit Auburn playing Georgia a little bit early, especially after what we saw last week. With Georgia struggling against Arkansas, at least early on in that first half, Georgia looked like a mess offensively. And Auburn looked decent, I thought, against Kentucky overall, especially Bo Nix and Seth Williams. And so I thought going into this game that maybe this was, good timing, that Auburn was catching Georgia at a good time. But obviously the transition from week 1 to week 2 is definitely different for Georgia than it was for Auburn.
Well, I do want to talk about some of what we saw last week and maybe how it could have indicated where things went tonight. I think, like you said, good week for Auburn last week overall, pretty balanced performance. But we came out of that game, I think if we had one concern about Auburn offensively, it was that there wasn't a super powerful rushing attack. And, I think some of that was just the nature of that game. Auburn was able to throw the ball effectively against Kentucky.
Right.
But you come out tonight, 39 yards rushing on 22 attempts. That's, basically completely ineffective. They were not able to run the ball whatsoever on Georgia. And I think that combined with, the obvious thing everybody's going to take away from this game is the inability to protect Bo Nix. He was running for his life all night.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I know that obviously they've made a mention of it on the broadcast, but like Auburn's offensive line, only one returning starter. It's essentially a new group of guys. And Georgia's defense was all over him, tonight. Bo Nix had no time to really set up a play. As soon as he hiked the ball, it seemed like a lot of the time he was already on the run. Sometimes he was on the run when he actually had coverage, and his instinct is just to run and get out of the pocket as fast as he can.
That's going to happen once the opponent starts to get in your head like that. And it's easy for us to forget that Bo Nix is still ultimately kind of a young guy who does not have a ton of collegiate experience.
Right, and I think there were a couple plays that he actually threw decent balls that they were just dropped. Obviously him and Seth Williams were on the same page against Kentucky. They connected on 2 touchdowns. I don't know how many yards they had to Seth Williams, but like tonight, I think Anthony Schwartz could have had a touchdown in the first half. I believe it was in the second quarter where he had beaten the guy and Nix just overthrew him a little bit. Probably would have scored a touchdown if he had let off the ball a little bit on that one. And then Seth Williams dropped one in the end zone. There were a lot of 50-50 balls that Seth Williams did not win tonight. So obviously Georgia's defense is a lot better than Kentucky's defense, but I still was surprised that Nix was just never really able to get into a rhythm, and it just, it affects the whole offense. Once you get down in a big hole that early, I think the whole team, it seemed like they were starting to get into panic mode a little too early, and they could just never get into a rhythm.
Yeah, Tate Bigsby ended up being the leading receiver for Auburn tonight with 68 yards on 7 catches, but and Anthony Schwartz got a pretty good amount of touches, 8 catches tonight. but just 57 yards total out of
Right.
that. And Seth Williams only getting 3 catches. I think that's kind of the big glaring stat there in the passing game, is after seeing how dominant he was in week 1, that he was pretty effectively shut down tonight by that Georgia secondary. And we saw a few stretches there where, I mean, I don't even think it was necessarily that Bo Nix didn't have time to target him or get him open. I think it was genuinely, they had a few stretches there where they were throwing to Seth Williams over and over again, and the Georgia DBs just made plays on the ball. I think they had a really good night competing with Seth Williams. I think Seth Williams looked a little bit banged up. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear something about that.
But I mean, he wasn't even targeted until like midway through the second quarter, I don't think. Seth Williams.
I think you're right.
So
let's talk a little bit about Tank Bigsby, because I think he was an interesting element tonight. Obviously nobody was really able to run the ball super effectively, but I do think Bigsby had some nice runs in the second half. And like we said, he got involved in the passing game, seemed to be kind of forming a little bit of a connection with Nix over the course of this game. And I wonder if we're going to start to see the majority of the carries start to tilt in his favor going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. I think obviously Auburn went into the season with kind of the, running back by committee approach, with Sean Shivers and DJ Williams and Tank Bigsby. But I think after, just seeing tonight, like I said before we started recording, I think Tank Bigsby was one of the few, bright spots for Auburn tonight. And I think being a young guy, he's a 5-star true freshman. Obviously, he wants to make the most of every appearance that he has. And even if Auburn's losing big, it seemed like he was still, had some fight in him, I guess is what I'm trying to say, late in the game. And so that's only going to help him get more reps in practice, that kind of effort that he's still showing. So, I think that he's probably has the highest ceiling out of the running back core right now, or the running back room. Overall, obviously he's a true freshman. I'm just talking about, in his career, I think Tank might be the guy later on. But yeah, I mean, they're going to have some guys step up, and it all starts on the offensive line, because there was just really not a lot of room to work with for the offense tonight for Auburn.
And I do think the defense mostly, look, Georgia's a really good team. Okay. They're extremely talented. 27 points was not enough. Look, they got beat handily tonight, Auburn did, but a lot of games for Auburn under Gus Malzahn, holding your opponent to 27 points is going to give you a pretty good shot to win the game.
Right.
I'm sure people are going to be upset about the defense tonight, especially because, Georgia looked dominant on both sides of the ball, but I really don't, it's hard for me to be too critical of this Auburn defense, considering how much of the game they were on the field tonight, how repeatedly they just had to get, punched in the face by Georgia over and over again, with really no support from their offense to keep them off the field. So I don't know. I'm sure there are things that the Auburn defense could have done better. But I don't see this as a huge failure on the Auburn defense's part. I think for the most part, they kept this game within reach for basically most of the first half anyway.
Right. I agree. And, obviously they lost Smoke Monday, like in the first quarter, really early on. And so that was a huge blow to that defense. But I still think, like you said, I think if you're looking to pin, some blame, offense versus defense, I would definitely say the offense is what failed to produce more than the defense tonight. I think that, Georgia, and even Georgia's quarterback situation was obviously kind of in question coming into this game, but Stetson had some big holes, to throw through, and it was just it was rough for Auburn tonight, and just not being able to get any momentum felt like throughout the whole game.
Let's talk about where Auburn goes from here. Obviously they're gonna need to shape up in a lot of areas. They play Arkansas next week, which would have sounded like a pretty easy win, and maybe it still will be. But Arkansas shocking America tonight by beating Mississippi State and ending a very, very long losing streak in the SEC for Arkansas. So, suddenly next week is not necessarily an easy cakewalk for Auburn. I'm curious, just Wes, you have been, following Auburn football since the beginning of the Gus Malzahn era. You really know that program, and you've covered that program extremely, thoroughly and closely while it's been under Gus's leadership. When you think back to other examples of an early season loss like this, especially a really demoralizing, like not a close loss, how are there any examples this sort of immediately compares to for you? And how do you typically see Auburn teams reacting under Gus to a sort of an early season loss like this?
I mean, we mentioned it earlier, that Clemson game in 2017 where
Right.
Auburn, I think it was week 2, after they played kind of a cupcake game in week 1, they went to Clemson and just got it handed to them. Jarrett Stidham was sacked several times, and it was kind of like tonight. They were just never really in the ball game. And, in terms of the Auburn fan base and Gus Malzahn, I think it's just been up and down for pretty much his whole tenure at Auburn. I'm sure you'll see some fans, calling for Gus to be fired.
I'm sure they're in the comments under this video right now.
Yeah, I'm sure that people are saying that. But this is obviously a different season, and there's 8 more games to be played, and anything can happen when the SEC is just going to be beating up on each other all year. So, I don't think the sky's fallen yet. However, if Arkansas comes into Auburn next week and wins that game, then I think that becomes extremely more serious of a
That would
situation.
be pretty bad. I think that would be really tough for Gus and the fan base to sort of come back from.
Right. But like you said, Georgia's a great team. Obviously, they're a top 5 team, potentially a playoff team. We'll see how it shakes out. So, going to Athens is always hard, but man, Georgia has owned this series, in the last 15, 16 years. The only time that Auburn has won is when they're in the national championship discussion in 2010, 2013, 2017. That's it. So Georgia's
look, as you said, 2017 was not that long ago, man. And that I think we were all declaring the Auburn offense, dead on arrival after that Clemson game in 2017. And they absolutely found their way over the course of that season and ended up, looking like really the best team in college football right up until losing Kerryon Johnson in the Iron Bowl. So,
yeah, I mean, that season ended with back-to-back wins over, the number 1 team in the country, where Auburn beats Georgia at home and then beats number 1 Alabama at home and then loses the rematch to Georgia in the SEC championship. But going into the SEC championship, going into the final week before the playoffs, they were ranked number 2 in the country in the playoff rankings. So, and that was with 2 losses because they also lost to LSU that year.
That's right.
So obviously this is a shorter schedule this year. So I don't think Auburn can afford a second loss at this point. But if you're going to lose a game, losing to Georgia on the road is, somewhat understandable, I would say. But not like this. I mean, Auburn was just never in this game. Couldn't get into the end zone. It just didn't look good at all.
It's hard. Look, Wes and I do this for a living, and I don't think we're going to pretend to tell you guys that we know how everything's going to work in 2020 football, because nobody has ever seen a season like this. We don't know what it's like to play an only conference schedule in college football. We have no idea what that is like or how you recover from that. But
it's already gotten crazy with LSU losing to Mississippi State and then Arkansas beating Mississippi State the next week. Like, the season's going to be different than anything we've seen.
I think the point would be here that chaos is entirely possible, and I would say expected over the course of this season, and that sometimes can hurt you, sometimes that can benefit you. I think that Auburn has been a program that has found a way to benefit from chaos multiple times in recent history. So I definitely don't think it's time for everybody to just give up on this team and say nothing good can come of this season. If anything, losing early in the season like this is the best time to lose, because you have time to rebound from it and figure out your way.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to obviously drop in the polls, but losing early gives you time to slowly move back up if you're able to continue winning. And I think that the schedule kind of works out for Auburn this year. Most of the more difficult games seem to be fairly spread out in the schedule. Obviously, they have Alabama toward the end of the season. They closed the season with Texas A&M. LSU's kind of in the middle. You had Georgia toward the beginning. So I think there's not really like two really tough games back to back. I don't think for Auburn's schedule. So it's possible, but the offensive line has got to improve. That's the first priority. I think if that happens, I think obviously Bo Nix has shown that he can compete in the SEC. He can be a capable quarterback. Especially if he's connecting with Seth Williams and Anthony Schwartz and guys like that. I think the defense obviously could have played better tonight, but the offensive line is, I think, the biggest concern.
Yeah, well, we will certainly follow the fallout from this game on AL.com. We will take you through next week as Auburn gets ready to play Arkansas and hopefully rebound from what happened tonight. And lots more coverage to come, including Gus Malzahn's post-game press conference right here on our Auburn Tigers at AL.com page. So, Wes, thanks for joining me.
Yep, no problem.